I'm going to start recording this session and just do a brief introduction and start the presentation. So for folks who were not on the call last time, so my name is Daniela, or Danny. I am leading the webinar series, and I'm the owner of Protected Packaging Consultants. I work as a packaging engineer. I've worked in the past for a company called H&M, which is apparel and home furnishings, and helped launch their e-commerce business in the U.S. a couple years ago. I specifically worked in the warehouse, making sure that we have all the systems in place to begin shipping and fulfilling orders for e-commerce, bringing in inventory, accepting returns, etc. And then also I moved to Wayfair.com, where I worked as an operations manager, a data analyst, and a packaging engineer. So that's kind of a little bit of my e-commerce experience. I have other experience, and I'm sure you guys are probably not interested in hearing that because it's a lot of weird stuff in a lot of other industries, like environmentalism, et cetera. But if you have questions about my background, Protected Packaging Consultants, our services, packaging design, anything, Q&A at the end, you're welcome to type it in the chat window, but I would be happy to give you any additional information that you ask for. The things that we are going to touch on today, obviously this is all geared towards e-commerce because most of you are probably in e-com industry. So I want to just talk about customer education during this seminar. I'm specifically touching on the transit packaging, briefly discussing how customers are opening their products, and then talking about assembly and kind of the do's and don'ts there. My goal in this, I think this is a vastly unexplored topic. If you go to packaging conventions, if you go to transportation and talk to carriers, there's a lot of blame and finger pointing towards, well, it's the customer's fault, or it's the carrier's fault, or it's the person packaging it. And as much as I don't like to assign blame, I say we all carry it, but a lot of that is not specifically devoted to the education piece. I think a lot of it is, well, if trucks were better, if delivery drivers didn't throw my stuff or drop it, if the potholes in the roads were fixed. But there's a huge opportunity to make sure that customers are doing better, and we can hold them to a certain standard as well, and kind of have them hold responsibility for their experience receiving e-commerce goods and purchasing them as well. So, and then a huge portion of that is involved with the packaging. So when I talk about that, and it's kind of like the user experience, it's not just packaging your products to make it to the customer. It has to make it through the customer as well. And they have to have a little bit of that wow factor. And I'm not talking about the Star Wars packaging where when you open up one of the boxes, like the music starts. Obviously, e-commerce in the home goods, furniture, outdoor industries is a little different, but we do want the customer to have that feeling of not only did it come undamaged, which they're probably just thinking, yay, it came like it's perfect, it's unblemished. They're hopefully not thinking it could have come damaged, but they're like, wow, this box is great. Opening it up was great. Unpacking it was great. Everything about the experience was super simple, and I'd love to buy it with them again. So that's the goal here. I just want to make sure that we're giving the customer all the tools necessary to be able to enable them. So this should be about 35-minute presentation because I want to answer all questions. Last time we only had a handful of questions. I'd love for you guys to ask me all the questions. So please make sure at the end or take notes now so that we can have a really great discussion later. So the first thing I want to talk about, so moving, storing, and warnings. So for those of you who joined the last webinar, there is, and I will be posting that, by the way, on our website so anybody can take a look at it. There's a lot of customers in the e-commerce world who are DIYers, or they are expecting to be able, they're e-commerce shopping either because it's a great value to them, they don't have to go to the store, it's saving them time, it's saving them money, they believe that they're getting a discount, maybe they don't want to talk to people, who knows, but they are receiving their product and they are taking responsibility for getting it into their home. Some of the times there are white glove deliveries, I get that. So different deliveries, different amount of ownership into the actual moving. The storage, I recognize that there are contractors who are purchasing for customers or interior designers who might be storing this stuff. But most of the time when you're selling through places like Overstock, Amazon, Wayfair.com, those folks, they're getting it into their homes and the product is sitting there. They're probably not opening it right away. Some folks are, but a lot of times it's sitting there. So they're storing the product in some way. And then they're entering their shipment in some way. So I want to, in this case, in this presentation, this webinar, there's a lot of just recommendations in general. And as I said before, I'm going to be posting this. I'm going to post the last one as well. So you guys don't have to take too hard of notes right now. But I want to make sure that you guys understand, like, this is my experience with working with both carriers, customers, the data showing what customers are able to do, what they respond to. So there are a lot of recommendations in this thing. The first one being, if your item's too heavy for one person to open or remove from the packaging, you need to illustrate that. So I do caution in saying that if your shipment is too heavy for one person to carry it in, is that realistic? And I think that's a resounding question across a lot of these different points and throughout the presentation. If you are shipping the really heavy TV stands that have glass or a fireplace insert inside of them, and you're shipping them through FedEx or UPS ground, they're probably being left outside of the home. And even if you're getting your product, if the product is being delivered to a house, there may be an entryway step. They might be bringing it up to the second floor. The customer might be doing this alone. And if it's too heavy for one person to lift, it's probably really difficult for the delivery driver to actually transport this onto the property, get it out of their truck, kind of going out of order there. So actually getting it into the truck, they might have equipment, they might not, they may be manually loading this. They're probably doing a little bit of throwing, a little bit of dropping. That's to be expected. But actually getting it onto the property, they may or may not be using a hand truck of some kind. If they are, they may not be able to get it up steps. So if you have an inclined driveway, if there's gravel, like there are a lot of different kind of home ownership or apartment realities that may be impacting the mechanics of getting the product close enough for the customer to not be as burdened by the shape or the weight of the delivery. That being said, a customer may not realize how heavy that is. If they're just seeing a long box, they're expecting, like, okay, I can lift this up, no problem. They try to lift it up, they throw their back out. You're probably not getting calls about this. I recognize that. But it's probably, there are customers out there that are saying, I'm never buying e-commerce again, or I'm never buying this kind of crap again online, and they're angry about it. And we certainly don't want to leave them with that type of post-delivery experience. So make sure that there's warnings. Put the weight on there, gross weight, this many pounds or kilograms. If it is, this item contains glass. Educate the customer as to when they walk outside their door after their doorbell is rung because something was delivered, what do they need to be aware of? And keep in mind that it may not be delivered face up, especially in the small parcel world. They might be getting a delivery that is upside down, or they maybe are they're rolling it into their house. That's a really common delivery method for customers, where if you're alone, you kind of cartwheel your box into your house. Or through the doorways. And so you might be changing the orientation of the package, and therefore the signage may not be visible. So you might consider putting the signage on top and bottom. Just kind of, as I alluded to in the last webinar, like kind of test the package, pretend you're a customer, or actually send it to somebody's spouse, little brother, whatever it is in your company, and ask them to, as a completely unaware, unassuming customer, knowing nothing about what they're getting, or very little for whatever purposes. If they have been waiting a week for the delivery, they may not remember which of the items they ordered actually turned up on their doorstep today and how much it weighs. Ask them to go through the motions of bringing their product inside, and ask, or actually have them mail it. You can offer gift cards, whatever it is. Give some, get that information from them and see, did they have trouble picking it up? Did they have trouble wrapping their arms around it? Were they smashing a corner into the wall or dragging it up concrete? And do that exercise a couple times, and you'll see, this side's heavier, so the delivery person is probably going to put it on the porch with the heavy side down because gravity, and that's the easiest way to carry it. Or there seem to be handles on my box. Are customers aware that they need to use those handles to lift it up? But if it is too heavy, you should be noting that as well. And you'll either want to put this, caution, 2-person lift required, put indicators and make them as moving and as motivational as possible. For instance, put an actual picture on there as opposed to just English wording, because not all folks speak English, etc. So you can also place a warning label on the seam. So if the box was easy to move in, but you have a lot of components or there's like a heavy bowling ball in there that they need to be wary of, actually make sure that the customer is going to be able to see the signage. If there's an easy way to open the carton or the orientation the customer should open it in, you need to add that information as well. Add arrows, add a cut indicator like open specifically here. And I've even seen folks actually put dotted lines. It's printed onto the package itself to say like specifically open here, and there are photos of scissors or a knife or whatnot. So I have an example of this. I'm not sure whether you guys are going to be pleased at all for hearing this, but one of the facilities I visited in my experience as a consultant, I went to their facility and they wanted me to look at the internal packaging, and they said, we have no idea why this is getting broken because we use really high density foam. We have a really strong box. For all intents and purposes, like this thing should not be getting broken at all. And I took a look at it, and it was a box that had very little information on the outside. Even if there's a shipping label, there's no guarantee that shipping label to the customer will be the right information of like, this is the orientation of how the box should sit as I open it. So I just said, okay, I'm going to pretend that I'm the customer. The box was completely unopened. They had just pulled it from the shelf. And I opened it up, and it turned out that it was open the wrong way. So it was a mirrored cabinet. It was absolutely beautiful. This thing is literally like a small dresser with legs, and everything is mirrored. So absolutely gorgeous, but extremely fragile. And so as a customer, I had opened it, pulled out all of the foam corners underneath the feet and all of the protective packaging surrounding the feet, only to discover that it was the wrong way up. So what I didn't do, I did not put the foam back in. I did not close the box back up. I said, as a customer, what I would do right now is I would try to tip the box over, having opened up the bottom, which to me was the top at that moment. I would just flip it. So I would then be able to shimmy the box up and off of the remainder of the product. So I proceeded to show them how, as a customer, I would flip it. And I am tall. I'm a pretty tall person, but I would say that I'm not the Hulk. For those of you who, if you want to have me at your facility, if I break something, I apologize in advance, because the look of shock for the next thing that happened with this particular client, they had their entire team out there, they had their CEO, and as I flipped the product over, glass shattered. You could hear it shattering. Glass fell out of the bottom for where the feet were going because I had put it on its side, and then I had put it on its feet. And it turned out that the pressure points of the packaging, they were pressing on the front faces of the drawer. And so as soon as I put it on its side, the glass broke. And as I changed the orientation again, the glass fell out. And so now if you're the customer, if this had been in the customer's home, now there's glass shards all over the floor. There's broken products. They are going to have to be able to package this back up so that it's safe, especially if you have kids or pets or whatnot. They're having to like clean up the glass shards, but now the glass shards are underneath the product. Like it's turning into a complete disaster. I and everybody else is mortified on the warehouse floor because there's literally glass on our feet, or around our feet, I should say. And so this all could have been avoided, first off, if we had thought about like, hey, did the customer open up the wrong way? For those of you who work with assembled furniture, you guys actually might be saying that's actually the way to do it. Like you have the customer open up the bottom of the box, flip the flaps back, have the product then have the feet or the bottom of the product touching the floor, and then shimmy the box off of it. That's the easiest way to remove the packaging. But in this case, even had we opened it up the right way up, there was a chance we would have damaged the product trying to lift it out of the box. So it wasn't customer friendly either way, whether we opened it upside down and broke it or right side up and had to lift this thing out of a box that was probably like 2.5, 3 feet tall. So it's a really tall box, and to lift something out of a box like that, customers are probably not going to do it right. So my recommendation to them was you guys should tell the customer to butterfly the box open upon receipt, and that's how they should move the product out. So instead of lifting it up and out of the box, hopefully with a partner, with that being known that you have a very fragile show surface on your item, you should be pulling it out of the box. For whoever just joined, I'm hearing a little bit of mic feedback. If you don't mind just muting yourself, just to make sure we don't have any distractions. So if you are not on mute, please mute yourself.
You text one about the recipe you bought yesterday. One of them.
Aha. Oh, yeah.
I'm just going to put this into the chat really quick. I'm so sorry. Brief intermission. All right, so that's just a reminder. Please mute yourself if you've just joined. I'm going to keep talking just because I know that we're only on the first slide, so I want to make sure I'm cognizant of time.
100 credits. Oh, okay.
So just finishing up that example, it was a very unorthodox method of putting the markings on the outside of the box to say they actually slice the vertical edges of the box open and giving the customer that information. But in that way, they were able to remove the packaging and slide the box or slide the product out horizontally as opposed to have to lift it up. Every time something gets lifted up, there's always a risk of it getting dropped if they're being damaged. So it was something where we had to completely change the way that we had customers reacting to the packaging.
They have product with power.
So, sorry guys, I'm hearing a lot of conversation. If you don't mind muting yourselves, I don't know if it's the same folks, but please mute. And that way we won't hear any weird residuals from office conversation. It's also going to keep me not distracted. So I also put on here, so just going through, I'm going through the slide. I think you guys can see my mouse. So caution, heavy object, two-person lift acquired. Just a good example. Google that. Pretty easy to find. Open carton here. It's cute. You can put that as an indicator or print that directly onto your box. So this part's pretty interesting. Customers may not know about this, but to keep the right orientation, so for instance, if you have a desk and if you flip the desk over and the drawers will probably fall out of place, we don't want it to change orientation. Most things have an orientation for a reason. And so I want to notify folks, this end up, this is great information, but these are called floor stripes. And floor stripes, this is a way to tell carriers, the actual folks working with the trucks, that this is where I want to keep my products touching the floor. So anywhere that there's a floor stripe, that edge can sit on the floor. So this one is saying that only the bottom edge, which is sitting on, should touch the floor. If you put the stripe vertically, they could turn it on its end. If you put the stripes as a decorative fashion, which has also happened in the past, a very major furniture manufacturer, they actually have a beautiful design on their package. And so when I worked with them, I actually said, do you know that this is indicating you can ship this box any direction? Granted, not everybody knows about floor stripes, so customers, but warehouse folks may not be as keen on this one, but most carriers do know it. And they're in some cases attuned to what the stripe means, but if you put stripes everywhere, it may be confusing to the carriers. So for some others, do not lift product horizontally. So there are some products like glass and marble, natural stone, that if you lift it and the thin face is parallel to the ground, it could crack from its own weight. And customers may not know that. So this is a great indicator to say, make sure you lift it upright and carry it in this fashion and actually put that on your box or put that on the product itself, on the packaging internally, and just remind the heck out of them, because customers forget. Sometimes they go through various stages of opening it. You might have different people working on it at a time depending on what your product is. So educate, educate, educate. I'm going to move on in the presentation. I spent way too much time on this slide. So this is another case. So I had another client request information from me. They were like, we need to change our packaging. We have damage reported. We think our carriers are using machinery that slices open our box, and therefore our product arrives to the customer with huge slits in it. And they were shipping very delicate leather upholstery, very high-end textiles and upholstered products. So what I looked at is, again, a lot of this comes from me just playing with the box and the packaging, but each time a customer received this, it wasn't a carrier issue. Customers were actually cutting into their own products because the product was packaged and poofy right up to the edge. And so when a customer gets this, even if it says do not open with a sharp instrument, like, what do they really have to open with? Some customers have box cutters. They're going to get their box cutter because you just shipped them a box. Or customers might get a butcher knife, and they will proceed to stab through the tape. And most customers don't know to just use a very small amount of knife edge. They will sink the blade in as far as it goes. Scissors, same thing. It will scratch the product inside. And so this was something, it's kind of silly, but it ended up being a huge cost savings to them that they were able to just simply make a quick change in the design of their box. They changed from an RSC, which is where the flaps kiss in the middle. They switched to a partial overlap, which means the flaps actually overlap a little bit. So when they sealed the box, the tape still sealed perfectly. There was a little bit of a rise because one flap was overlapping the other flap by about 2 inches. That's okay because they were shipping upholstered goods. And each time a customer opened it, they cut the tape, but it just cut into the next flap. It didn't cut into the product. Another solution they used for their bigger items so as to save on the cost of corrugate and to not have to extend their box flaps, they just put some leftover corrugated, some leftover cardboard, and they taped it to the product where the seam would be on a RSC box. So RSC, when I say RSC, it means regular slotted container, and that just means the flaps meet in the middle. So you can actually, once you cut into it, you're putting in your product. Partial overlap or full overlap means that the flaps overlap in some method. So in this case, which is this photo, again, I hope you guys can see my mouse. I think you can. So they just put this layer of corrugate, and it was effective in being able to prevent the cut through. So that's the information that we put over here. That was our very basic recommendation. It ended up saving them several $100,000 per year by just making that small packaging change, which cost them very little. And in this case, they were actually using waste materials, so it was even better. Moving on, product education. So this is something where I alluded to in the introduction is we need to make sure customers are understanding what they're buying so as to prevent returns. We had some questions in the last webinar about return rates. And this is something that I do want to mention as a leading cause of returns and customer reports of dissatisfaction and negative reviews is they aren't exactly sure what they're getting. And when they receive the product, they might call in, especially if you're using a third-party agent like Amazon. Amazon might just ship them a replacement. So sorry, we sent you a defective product. We'll send you another one. You guys send a whole new one from inventory. But it came from the same batch, right? Or it's the same design. And in a lot of cases, if the original issue is not, if the customer isn't educated about what the actual issue is, it could be the design of the product itself. And they might be getting a whole new replacement, and that replacement is the same problem. And they might get a third replacement, a fourth replacement, it's the same problem, right? So then you have an unhappy customer. You've wasted a lot of inventory, which is a huge cost to you guys, but also means you're going to run out of stock, especially if you have very left or you are waiting for a production run or whatnot. So it's just a shame in that case. It's a lot of waste in the system. A huge cause of this is natural distressing. So anyone who's made something that looks artistic, is made out of natural wood, natural stone, leather, this is something that we've seen customers get really confused about. For instance, for any of you who work with leather, customers sometimes ask why they can't get a leather cushion, like a leather couch cushion that goes all the way around. And it's almost comical because for those of you who do work with leather, you'd realize like leather, it's not a porous surface like fabrics are. So if you were to make a completely round cushion or a completely leather encompassed cushion, you would not be able to sit on it very comfortably because it'll probably just pop at the seams because the air can't escape and then refill like most foam cushions can with a fabric or woven solution. And so customers are not they want reversible cushions, and the whole conversation, like even if we ship the replacement cushions, you cannot get, or I should say not cannot, but in some cases from some leather sofa cushion manufacturers, you aren't able to placate the customer because they're not understanding that this isn't a defect or it's not a quality issue. It's the nature of that material. And so educating them beforehand, or maybe making a little video explaining that and putting that on the site with your product. Similarly, marble surfaces, natural stone, the tiles that you're getting, they might have color variation, they might have natural veining and staining, and that's because you're purchasing something natural. It's not identical, it cannot be unblemished and perfect every time because it's not a synthetic man-made product. So in those cases, natural distressing has really, in some cases, backfired. And if customers aren't educated right up the bat on all of the possible imperfections with your product, they view that as either a defect or poor quality, and then you end up having returns, you end up having wasted inventory, you send replacements out, and you have a customer who you've just probably turned off of your whole brand or potentially commerce. So definitely not what we're trying to go for with the goal of, obviously pleasing customers. And this isn't, the things that I'm talking about here, they're not packaging related, but I just feel like with my experience, I owe it to the industry to explain that in some of these cases, it's not a packaging solution. It may be that your product is getting shipped to the customer, they're upset with it, they package it up poorly, and they choose to return it, but you can't resell it because it arrives to your return. So you've not only wasted an entire piece, now you have an unhappy customer, and you can't resell that item to even make any of that money back. So in some cases, even though it's not a true packaging problem, it is something in regards to, in some cases, it still causes a cost to your business as a packaging issue, especially with the returns or the reverse logistics process. Another thing, so I'll quickly go through the rest of these, but I have so many examples I would love to share with you. If there's something specific you want to hear more about, I'm happy to share more of my experience during the Q&A. But levelers on chairs, customers don't know how to use them. They're not aware that they're there. They just, they call in and say the chair or the table's unlevel. And they don't realize that they have the solution on their hands to fix it. It happens all the time with outdoor seating groups and outdoor furniture. Like the whole reason you put levelers on there is to avoid those types of call-ins. And I can't tell you enough how many times, a $5, $6 customer service call is happening because customers are not understanding what levelers are, that they're already installed or need to be installed on their legs, or how to use them. Adjustable hinges. So this is something I had a couple issues with. So I purchased a beautiful microwave cart because I don't have a lot of storage in my very small kitchen here in Boston. And so I spent an hour or so assembling it and then realized that the doors weren't closing. And it took me forever to figure out how to deal with the hinges because there wasn't a lot of information in the assembly guide on how to adjust those. And so I looked it up with the data. I looked up to see how many customers are reporting there's a gap between the doors, or the doors don't sit right or not level on the hinges, or the doors can't open or close because they're stuck. And that's just because of how they actually, assemble that item with that adjustable hinge. And the adjustable hinge, like you've designed that product, you're paying for that product's better quality. That hinge is actually like a really good solution to being able to, over time, continue keeping the doors on straight, right? But customers don't know how to use it, therefore they view it as a defect or a problem or potentially a damage from transit. It should be a selling point, as I put in here, but it has to be presented early on, and you have to educate the customer. Otherwise, they're going to view it as a detriment to the product. And then spare parts. So customers sometimes are not understanding why there are spare parts. And so, for instance, one of my recommendations that I give to folks that send hardware packs is make sure that you separate out the components, but also mark that there's an extra nut or bolt or screw associated with each one of these, and that's just in case you lose one in the future. But customers think they've done something wrong and get confused and get frustrated, and sometimes leave reviews about it. So it's even like no good deed, right, goes unpunished. So it's just something that you guys you're including as a selling point and as a benefit to purchasing your product, and it might make your product yours, but it's something that customers are going to get upset about, and we don't want that to happen. So this is specifically in regards to parts. So we get a lot of questions about this because it is kind of a packaging thing, right? Like, where do you put the parts to make sure they don't terrorize your item and make sure that you don't have to ship it out over and over again for any replacement parts or hardware packs, et cetera, and make sure the customer can find them without, too much of a headache. So these are the recommendations I have in regards to parts. This is a very general statement. If you guys have specific products that you have questions about how to include the hardware pack, or you know that you're sending out a lot of replacement hardware components and you're not sure why, I'm happy to look at those as a consultant to your business, or if you just want to send over a quick photo, maybe I can give you like a quick insight without having to spend too much time on it. But recommendations, give them information on where to look for it. So attach a ribbon or some sort of string, et cetera. Here's a good picture of it. And so make sure that you are actively presenting a route to the hardware pack to the customer, but it also helps you as a shipper to confirm that there are parts inside. So if you don't see one of these stickers or you don't see a string coming out to the outside of your box, you know, hey, this might be missing the hardware pack. So it's a good quality control method too. Also make sure there are some hardware packs out there that have been designed to not look like hardware packs. They might be in a box. They might be like a very small light box. They might be a small bag that's black or dark red, and customers may not be aware that there are multiple layers of the hardware pack, or that it's hidden, or there are components in there that are slightly hidden. So just make sure, again, this whole thing's about customer education. I keep saying it, but like, tell the customer where you want them to look and what they're looking for. Educate the customer because they're not, a lot of the times they're not figuring it out for themselves, and it may be on them, it might be on you, it might be a combination of factors, but you kind of have to make it foolproof. I do have a caveat here, and this is a really important part where sometimes my recommendations are not heeded. So I've had folks who implement the hardware ribbon, and it just sticks out of the edge of their box. So a fully closed box, and then there's like a ribbon waving in the wind outside of it. That is going to get you an upcharge with UPS or FedEx because all of their dimension programs are non-human. They're they use lasers and AI to be able to scan the dimensions of your product, to be able to revise their shipping cost based on either dimensional weight or dimensions, period, or weight. So if you have something sticking out of the side of your box, whether it's a flap, whether it's a piece of tape, a hardware ribbon, if that's sticking far out of your box, that is adding on to the dimension of your product. So just make sure you tape that down really well. And then explain everything to customers clearly, make no assumptions. And so I have visited a couple factories where the factory owners couldn't believe that the customers were not knowing that the dust cover could be removed or pulled back to look for parts. So if you're selling to a customer who's never purchased their couch before, they don't know to look inside of a dust cover, they don't know that it comes off, they may not know to look there. Even if you say look inside dust cover, they might be expecting a little zipper. So you might want to make sure they understand that it's like a Velcro dust cover, where if they pull on the right-hand corner, the Velcro is removable, whereas if they pull on the left, they're just tearing it off. So again, I give these examples because they're real. There's a reason they're included in this. Go through them. I have helped various e-commerce shippers with this because customers are not understanding, and because you or I, working in the furniture, your home goods, e-commerce industry, we might have seen this many times, and we intuitively know how to do it. Customers who've never purchased a sofa before, who've never looked inside of a drawer to find the taped hardware to the bottom of the drawer or whatever, they just don't know where to look. So, yep, give them signage and customer education, the whole theme to this, right? And so this is coming up on the last portion of the presentation, which is assisting in assembly. I've seen so many really difficult assembly guides, and it's a shame because customers, it might be a really easy item to assemble, or if the assembly guide had been laid out in a more intuitive manner, they wouldn't have gotten so frustrated. And there's actually, there are a lot of returns, again, depending on category, I'd be happy to give you more data on the specific rates, but especially for ready-to-assemble products, something, flat packs, a customer may open an item up. They may not realize how easy it is to assemble. All they see is a hardware pack that's in a huge bag. It's a lump. It may have moved around and destroyed some of the packaging. So now there's some fatigued foam. When they open the box, they might get some foam nuggets flying around, some white snow in their apartment or in their house. And they see this huge, very intimidating plastic bag that's heavy and probably heavier than like a small component of their flat packed item. And they say, oh my God, this thing has 800 small parts and it has 800 screws I have to figure out what to deal with. And then they look at the hardware guide or the assembly guide, and it looks like this, where it's like 800 steps in one, and they're just expected to kind of throw it together. And a lot of e-commerce folks, they get products in their returns departments where the only thing that has been opened is you can see that the hardware has been opened in some way, and a customer just kind of said, I'm done, I'm frustrated with this, and I don't want to continue. And I think this is going to take me forever, and I'm frustrated, I'd rather return this and try to assemble it. There may not be a problem with it, and now that they've opened it up, they've impacted the packaging negatively. They've moved it around. They probably can't repackage, especially flat-packed items, in the same way as it originally was packaged at the factory. And so they're just throwing it back in the box. And by the time it gets back to you, if it gets back to you in one piece, the components look like they're disheveled. They might have been scratched. The hardware pack may have been opened and kind of gone everywhere, kind of exploded, leaving pock marks or scratches all over the items. And at the end of the day, even if the components inside they still are undamaged, you can't resell that item at a good price point to make it worth it, to make the return at least salvageable in terms of cost, because it doesn't look good. Like, you can't send it back out because it's literally been a returned item. And if it looks like a returned item, customers are upset. So in these cases, I just want to, encourage you guys to, as I did with so many of my clients, pretend you're the customer and pretend that you're a little bit clueless. Is this intuitive? Is everything up from getting it into your home to assembling it easy and frustration-free? Another thing that I put on here, so this actually, the first part talks to the right-hand image, and I already talked to a little bit on the left-hand image here on this slide, but lay out the hardware. If you just get a bag, like a blistering bag of hardware, the customer is much more likely to get frustrated and get confused and use the wrong piece, potentially bursting through things like MDF, where if you use the wrong length of screw, like you could cause a huge MDF hill or bubble, or break the product or strip the screws, et cetera. There's a lot of, customer-caused damage that can come with incorrect assembly, but if you're laying it out and you actually indicate which parts are which, there's a lot less risk of that. It's also a lot easier to pack into a box if it's flat and laminated, because you can tape it to an inside flap. There's a lot of just better opportunities for pack design there, and it's presentable to the customer. In terms of the left-hand image, as I said before, that's really confusing to me as a consumer. But on the other hand, as a customer who may not understand, which part is which, labeling things, this is the left or the right facing, or saying like, this is the corner, part one comes in contact with part two, so you actually label that edge and say like, these two should fit into each other, and label that both in the diagrams in the assembly guide, but also put that literally on your product. You can get very low tack, low adhesion labels that don't leave any residue on your items, but really help the customer understand like, this is actually, the correct part, and it should face inward as opposed to outward. There was in my experience with Wayfair, we had a major e-commerce player who didn't label their left and right facing parts, and because of that, we received a lot of customer reports that they we figured out at the end of reading through all of these call-ins that customers were putting the parts backwards, and so they didn't have the right holes, but the customers were actually complaining that the pre-drilled holes were not present, and it's because they put it together upside down and switched to left and right pieces. So it's those types of pieces where they're reporting a defect, but it's actually the assembly guide that's an issue with the actual the customer usage. And had they labeled the pieces, they wouldn't have had defects reported. We wouldn't have sent them replacement parts. A lot of that cost and frustration would have been avoided, but ultimately, you know, you guys as the e-commerce manufacturer wouldn't have to be dealing with you know, reports on your website of like, this is really difficult to assemble, I don't recommend this, poor quality, didn't come with the right holes, etc. So the last thing I have in here is consider creating a troubleshooting video or a troubleshooting guide, because customers may get through the entire guide and then they have an issue of some kind. So this is a good place to say, you know, we did include levelers in your chairs, or if you're having a problem, try just adjusting the levels in a certain way, or we can provide, here's a link to a video. If you go online onto our website, you can see what this is supposed to look like, and we'll give you some assembly tips. This is really helpful for things like faucets, because customers will assemble the whole thing and then they'll have a leak, and it's a tweaking issue, or they forgot to put one of the gaskets in, just a rubber stopper, and because of that, they believe that there's a defect with the faucet, when truly there's not. So it's those types of situations that can avoid a return, avoid a lot of frustration, but ultimately make sure that the customer doesn't damage their own item, and then you know, the cost comes back onto you for having to replace that item. So there are 15 minutes left. I wanted to give enough time for questions. Is there anything that I can explain further? Feel free to use the chat, or you can just type in now. Any questions? Hearing a lot of crickets, so either I gave you guys a lot of information that was self-explanatory, or you guys already knew this, but I'll give it a couple more minutes. You guys are welcome to log off. If you don't have any questions, I'm always happy to take questions by email or provide you guys with a private consultation. Just anything you guys need, let me know. Happy, as you guys probably have figured it out, I love talking about packaging, so can talk about boxes and labels all day. Great, so I'm not hearing anybody with questions. I'm not seeing any questions on the chat screen right now, so I'm going to conclude this webinar. I would love feedback. If anybody would like to suggest some webinar topics, always interested in hearing what you guys want to hear about. If you guys have feedback, I would love to hear it, either in regards to the presentation contents or the presentation style, my delivery, etc. And again, if you have questions for me in regards to the information, maybe you don't want to share them out loud, totally fine. Please just shoot me an email. So it's propackconsult@gmail.com. And in future, I will put the email address in the presentation, but you will have gotten an invitation from me by email as well before. So please feel free to reach out to me at any time about anything, packaging or customer education, data related, etc. So thanks, everyone. So I'm gonna somehow figure out how to stop screen sharing, and I hope you guys have a good day.